and we've got more coming. It's my pleasure to introduce Tony Ogden from Genesis, who will introduce our next panel. Where's Tony?
Right here.
There you go. Wow, good to see you.
Thank you. This is a tall mic. Hi, I'm Tony Ogden with Genesis Federal. And looking around the room, it's really packed out today. And it's really great to see that many people really focused and passionate about customer experience. And we really enjoyed seeing the ACT CX Summits come to play here. Okay. It's my pleasure to introduce the next panel, Aligning Customers' Expectations with Meaningful Measures. Focus on the voice of the customer and voice of the employee. This panel will address the questions: how do customer expectations drive the appropriate measures? How do agencies determine the appropriate level of service for their budget? And how do you avoid creating measures that might drive the wrong behaviors? This panel is being moderated by Mariela Melero, Chief of Staff and Director of Customer Experience at USA Gov at GSA. Marianne has 26 years of federal and private sector experience in customer service and customer experience strategy, directing federal contact center and digital communication programs. In her current role as Chief of Staff and Director of Customer Experience for GSA's USA Gov site, she oversees the implementation of customer and user experience strategy for USA Gov digital and contact center programs. Marianne co-led the effort to implement GSA's first Government Customer Experience Index, enabling GSA's Office of Citizen Services and innovative technologies to measure and improve customer experience across all programs. She directs a government-wide community of practice that includes over 600 leaders from across government who are engaged in customer-centered efforts in their agencies. Her passion for improving government products and services began early in her career in private sector at the National Cancer Institute, where she directed NCI's Cancer Information Service Contact Center and developed their quality assurance, training, and development programs. Please join me in welcoming Marianne to the stage.
Good morning, everybody. We are the final panel of the morning. And not to buzz. So we're really excited to be here. We have an esteemed panel to drive a little bit more home on these messages of customer experience and measures that matter, and how you include your customer expectations as part of that process. So I'd like to introduce our panel. Starting from the far left is Stephanie Thum. Stephanie is the Vice President and Customer Experience Officer at the Export-Import Bank of the United States. Next to Stephanie is Mariela Melero. Mariela is the Associate Director for Customer Service and Public Engagement at the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services. Next to Mariela is Brenda Wensil. Brenda's the Chief Customer Experience Officer at the Office of Federal Student Aid at the Department of Education. And next to Brenda is Tim Lowden. Tim is the Acting Program Manager of the Digital Analytics Program at GSA. So thank you all for being with us today. I'm going to launch right in to keep us on schedule and to honor everybody's time and our final speaker. So I wanted to level set this panel discussion by asking each of you to bring your perspectives to this topic and share with the audience. We know there's many ways to measure the customer experience. And I'd like to hear a little bit from each of you about which measurement your agency or program uses and why you have selected the measures you've selected to measure customer experience or customer engagement. So let's start with you, Stephanie.
Hi everybody. So Ex-Im Bank, I don't know if everyone knows, is a United States government agency. We finance and insure exports toward the creation of U.S. jobs. We have a strategic goal as an organization to improve the ease of doing business for customers. So for us, it is about ease of use. We have a range of internal and external metrics that we use to measure and monitor and talk about internally how we're doing toward that goal. Internally, we measure, monitor, report, and escalate throughout the organization cycle times by product line. And externally, with customers, the customer effort score is a huge measurement that we use to monitor how we're doing toward that strategic goal.
Excellent. Thanks, Stephanie. Mariela, in your agency?
First and foremost, thank you for having us here, and good morning to all of you. I had the distinct privilege of becoming a customer of my agency at the tender age of 13. As I helped my parents navigate the citizenship process and the naturalization process. And I honestly think, no idea that I was going to end up being the sort of kind of the GPS and the navigator for what is indeed the largest immigration system in the world, just a few years later. But having had that baseline experience of understanding what the challenges could potentially be for someone who has the need to navigate one of our agencies, it doesn't really matter if it's mine or the Social Security Administration. I think the Ex-Im Bank maybe has a different audience or a different customer base, I should say. But for us, what is critical is to recognize that individuals like my parents needed help, that individuals like myself became navigators at a very early age, and my story is a story of millions of young adults and children that help parents even today navigate the complexity of the immigration system. We have individuals who, some of whom are potentially sitting in this room, that are leaders in technology and leaders in innovation, but still have to go through the immigration process because at the end of the day, they came here as individuals, professionals who were residing abroad. So how do you actually, it's a question that we ask ourselves every single day. We were just, Eric and I in the back, a colleague and I were just talking about it 35 minutes ago. You know, how do you segment your customer base and engage directly with that customer base to ensure that whatever it is that we're measuring here adds value to their experience? And I think the gentleman from the Social Security said it very clearly. This is not about what the Social Security Administration thinks that is value added. This is what the customer thinks is value added. So I think the biggest challenge for us is to recognize the diversity of the customer base, linguistically, culturally, and from the perspective of, as the lady in the back also mentioned earlier, the perspective of their comfort level when it comes to navigating the different technology channels that we open for them. And then we must measure not just the level of satisfaction, which we even report publicly as part of our GEPRA measures, but most importantly, what is the outcome here that both the customer and the agency are seeking.
Excellent. Very good points. Brenda, how about you in Department of Ed?
Yeah, federal student aid. Is this on?
I don't think so.
I don't think so. How many of you have ever had a college loan, student loan? Got a kid who has one, maybe? There are some. See me after class. I'll take care of it. The Office of Federal Student Aid is the part of the Department of Education that's lending loans for federal aid for high school seniors, adult learners, first generation kids who are trying to go to higher ed, to college. That might be a community college, it might be a 4-year, 2-year institution. And so we are early in this process of trying to understand a lot about that whole process. But there are a couple of measurement points that are really important to us when we do that work. On the front end of the system, so if you remember shopping for college, or if you have a kid right now who's shopping for college, I have an 18-year-old nephew right in the middle of it. There is a lot of work that we consider our customers are going through in that shopping process. And then once they think they know where they're going to school, they will get online and fill out a free application for federal student aid. We call it endearingly the FAFSA. I don't know if you've heard of what FAFSA is. But it is our job on the front end to make sure that that is easy, smooth, and not as complex as it currently is. We measure that in a lot of ways. We measure that in terms of how many applicants come to us and how long it takes them to do it and what they tell us their experience is. So there's a bit of a front end gauge that we have there. We have about 22 million applicants a year that come through that funnel. and we've just completed the first wave of our peak season this year, so we'll hit it again in the summer. So that's a very important measurement to us, is how does that shopping experience and financial literacy comes in there? How many of these young people or their parents really know what they're signing up for in terms of student debt? And we know we have that problem in this country right now, or that challenge at least. And so we're very conscious of that. And our mission is to make sure that people who do sign up for aid understand what they're getting, what's a grant, what's a loan, and do they in fact have to pay it back? And we have a lot of college graduates who thought that was a gift. So that's the front part. The back part is, once a student receives aid, goes to college, graduates, and we have many who don't, what we call, persist and finish the process. But the goal is that we help them persist and graduate. Then they enter repayment. And this is where we've really turned our focus over the last couple of years, which is we are watching this high portfolio of student loan debt, which is around $1.3 trillion right now. And our interest is in making sure that it is paid back, and that we reduce default rates in every way we can. And so we've turned a real focus. We feel like we have, in terms of return on time invested, we've done a pretty good investment up front and made that good, and it needs to get better, but we're now focusing toward the back end to say, let's use as much data as we have, as much information as we have, and try to predict default. And if we can understand if a student is getting in trouble on their repayment and catch them early, we are finding that we can in fact help curb default. So this is really important in a student's life. If they hit default and put a bad mark on their credit, well, we can't help them then, and then that's a lifetime kind of issue that they have to deal with. So a couple of measurements that are important to us is, how's it going on the front end? Are we in fact getting students in the pipeline for higher education? And then on the back end, do they know what they signed up for? Can they repay it? Sounds kind of simple, but it really probably should be. But that's our challenge. Welcome to any ideas anyone has about curbing default. Off to you.
Thank you. Tim, in managing the digital analytics program, what are you looking at from a digital perspective, and how? Share with us a little bit more about that.
Sure. So I have a really, I'm sort of the odd duck of this panel in that I'm not a CX professional, I'm a web analytics professional, and I'll speak today mainly from the perspective of web analytics, and specifically the program that I manage, and that the tools we use are tied to Google Analytics. Another reason that I have an interesting perspective on this is that, being that our program is a shared service across government, my customers are actually mostly you folks, and then you reach out to the end customer. And what I've loved that I've heard so far from all of you when you've been speaking about the measures is that it sounds like they're different. And I think what's really interesting is you'd be surprised how many times I get contacted and people say, okay, what should my KPIs be regarding our website? What's the most important metric? What can I report back to my senior management that's going to really tell a story? And I always tell them, a single metric does not tell any story. A single measurement doesn't really tell you anything without context. And so I have a few goals today, and one of my goals is to get everybody who has access to some sort of web analytics program to go home and log in and actually take a look at what's in there and what you can find, because I think that the tools that we have, things like Google Analytics and other web analytics tools, can provide an incredible amount of information to be used while you're journey mapping. Mariela was talking about how we can segment our customers and be able to greater understand what they need. Well, you've got data on every single person that visits your website. You can segment it by if they come from Montana, if they're on a desktop or mobile. You can even get demographic information now. And we actually have 45 agencies participating in our program using an instance of Google Analytics Premium. And I think we only have maybe 2 or 3 agencies right now that are using this demographics feature. It's relatively new, but you can actually segment now by, show me what the most popular pages that men from Colorado aged 35 to 40 were visiting. And so you don't have to guess about these journeys. You don't have to say, well, we think, you know, a 21-year-old female would want to do this. You can actually just find out. And then beyond that, you can measure those journeys within analytics tools by setting goal funnels and things like that, and finding out what percentage of your people are coming from a specific channel. So if you have a call center and the representative at the call center follows up with an email and there's a link in that email, you can track the success rate of people coming into your site from that email link with campaign URLs, or being able to measure the referral. And then from there, you can go on to really understand behavior all the way to an endpoint of whether it be completing an application, downloading a file, or even, especially for mobile devices, you can click on a phone number on the site and it'll call, and you can measure that and find out not only what's going on within your website, but also be able to have a lot of insight into, you know, the more broad omni-channel experience about where they're coming from and where they're going afterwards. So I really hope that we can encourage all of you in this session to take advantage of the fact that this is passive data. You don't have to ask anybody, you know, how they felt, what they did. It's like, it's already here and it's valuable.
Excellent, and I really do think you spoke so well to the power of our digital analytics and how that helps us understand our customers better. So while you wouldn't consider yourself a customer experience expert, you actually really are, because it's a very important program and it adds value and a lot of data to helping us understand our customers and their journeys. And so one of the goals of this panel is really thinking about and sharing experience about how we align those customer expectations. But you have to know who your customers are first, where they're going. So really important concepts that you just shared. My next question I wanted to ask the panel has to do with, you all identified different ways you measure the customer experience based on your goals and based on what you're trying to accomplish within your organization, your agencies, your programs. So how do you identify problems based on your measurements? And then what do you do? So you're measuring, but then what? What do you do with the data? What are you identifying? And how are you sharing that information, and with whom? That's a loaded question. Stephanie, would you like to start?
Sure. Well, Ex-Im Bank, as I mentioned earlier, measures and monitors and escalates and reports cycle times. And the way that we spot problems is, one of the lenses that we have in measuring and monitoring has to do with transactions that are in process. And every Tuesday morning, we have what we call an Operations Review Committee meeting, where we review a dashboard of transactions that are in process that are taking longer than our prescribed service standard times, which we co-developed with our customers and our frontline staff. And as we see transactions that are in process that are taking longer than those prescribed service standard times, we have a group of people, cross-disciplinary people around the table, and we can ask ourselves, why? Why is this taking so long? Sometimes it's an IT glitch. We have an IT person at the table who can help us with that. Unfortunately, sometimes it also has to do with personality conflicts between departments. We're all familiar with this. And so that gives us a chance to be very real about what's happening with these transactions. Perhaps there's a communication difficulty with a customer or an intermediary, or maybe we need to adjust how we're communicating, or explain rules and policies and procedures. And just by taking a look at those cycle times and seeing them lag for so long, we have to ask ourselves why, because we know that that time is of the essence to our customers, so we've got to figure it out and get those transactions moving in the right direction. So that's how we do. We take a look at the data, we ask why, and then we set out to change whatever it is that we need to do as fast as we possibly can. Sometimes there are longer issues in play. They continue to stay on our plate, but we continue to address them, but they just take longer. Mm-hmm. Does that make sense?
Yes. It's really important how you stress the importance of doing this weekly. And,
yes.
And establishing that rhythm to your cycle, and really bringing the right people to the table.
Right. I can't overemphasize the importance of that regular rhythm and cadence to the review of data, whatever it is that matters the most to your organization. You know, it's like when you're trying to teach your kids something. You know, you can't just tell them something once. You have to continue to bring the information to the table, and you have to continue to be inspired to action by the data that comes to the table. You have to ask yourself why, and set in motion not just a review of numbers on paper, but of behaviors that actually wind up meaning something to the customer's outcome, like Mariela was talking about.
Mariela, how do you bring your data to life, and how do you share it?
So, is this on? You all can hear me, correct? What can I say about immigration? I think it's one of the most visible social issues that we talk about every single day, and lately it has not necessarily been a very pleasant conversation. On a given day, 50% of those that we engage with are not happy with what we're doing. And that's a good day. I mean, that's a really, really good day. I'm lying. 75% are not going to be happy with what we're doing, and 25% are going to just have to go through the process. So data is, we have a disciplined approach. I think not as disciplined as yours, Stephanie. That's a reason why I love to learn from the best. But we do have a very disciplined approach. But one of the challenges that we have today is, how do you separate all of this the toxic nature of what is coming to you, even from a data perspective, but how do you separate all of this and focus on the voice of the customer and focus on the voice of the business and try to find that balance from a data perspective, because otherwise data can be also, Tim, overwhelming, and you know this very well. We're getting so much of it that, particularly when you think about an issue like immigration, when you think about everything, you can't open a paper, you can't turn the radio, you can't even talk to your best friend without having that conversation in the background. And with it comes a significant amount of baggage. At the end of the day, the most important thing for us on a weekly basis, we look at all of our critical markers. We have a call center that takes in 14.2 million calls a year, which is nothing compared to some of your call centers. But for us, that is a significant transactional opportunity for us to take that deeper dive that Tim talked about. And we have 23 different behaviors that we'd like to measure from a customer perspective, from a customer service perspective. But we also measure the customer's level of engagement and satisfaction. We also have individuals from all over the world, actually, that have the opportunity to communicate with us via electronic messaging, particularly those immigrants that are coming in with their immigrant visa for the very first time. So we need to provide them with 24/7. So at the end of the day, we're drinking from the fire hose when it comes to data, which is good. I'd rather be drinking from the fire hose than be thirst in the middle of the desert, not knowing what my customers are thinking, not knowing what you're thinking about what we're doing. But the biggest challenge, because of the enormity of the volume and the many data sources and the customers that, again, you have to, when you think about the diversity that I just indicated earlier, you have to think about the channels, and you have to think about how they're communicating with the agency as well. So it is drinking data from a fire hose, but it's also making sure that we are disciplined, focused, and that we share with leadership, because leadership has a capacity that is limited as well, that we share the pieces that are relevant and very value added and very customer centric. Excellent. Value added, relevant, and just really the key results versus everything. We have less than 5 minutes. I have 2 more questions. Brenda, you talked about your particular measures at Department of Ed, and they focus around getting people into higher education, and looking at that, as well as keeping people out of default. Right. What have been some of the challenges that you've faced in terms of coming up with aligning with the customer expectations? Have you had to change? Have you had to pivot?
Well, yes, we have. And I sometimes think of it as our challenges on the front end when you're trying to educate and make students aware of their choices and aware of just the basic financial accountability for what they're about to take on. And that has been a challenge for us, and financial literacy in general. And how do we weave that through our entire system and process up front? And then how do you measure that? Total challenge. The expectation is difficult because there are many students who come on and expect that they're going to fill out the application and that everything's going to be a grant and free, and they're going to march on, and that's not exactly the the reality of what's happening. So we do have to do a lot of education on our own to help offset what might be a misperception on behalf of students coming into the process, or their parents coming into the process. On the back end, I mean, you never have a lot of fun with people trying to pay back loans. This is not fun, and nobody is interested in doing it for their lifetime. So it's tough to, it's like you said, we're not liked on many days. But the expectation on the back end of this whole process should be that paying back your loan should not be difficult. It should not be complex or confusing. And our current state right now is we have multiple servicers with multiple products, and you could be holding 3 different loans with 3 or 4 different servicers. And so it's not easy on the back end. And some of that is driven by legislation that we deal with. And so there's an expectation that the process is easy on the back end, and you can repay a loan just like you do at your bank, and that you ought to have a pretty competitive interest rate, which by the way is also set by our congressional leadership. And so we have to work within some of those constraints, and it's really a challenge to help balance the expectation of consumers in a financial product like a loan, with the government structure we're under.
Yeah, understood. And Tim, I wanted to just wrap up asking you a question more specifically about the digital analytics program. You spoke about the importance of the data that you can get by looking at your analytics digitally. Tell us a little bit more about what's coming with DAP in terms of integrating any more sorts of services or voice of customer and survey into the program.
Sure. So we're working on a tool right now that will basically be a customer satisfaction survey tool, similar to those that I'm sure you've all seen that pops up when you enter a site. And the unique feature about this is that the data from the survey questions will actually be implemented into our web analytics tool, which is Google Analytics. So what's really interesting, and it should be said that if any of you are using these customer satisfaction tools already, these surveys, you should see if you have the ability to do an integration into a web analytics tool. Because what's really great about that is then you can pair some of this. It's not necessarily qualitative because you're asking, scores 0 to 10, things like that. But when that kind of information comes into something like a web analytics tool, you can then segment and say, show me only the pages that visitors who ranked our site or were satisfied with our site on a level of less than 5 of 10. And then you can see the kinds of journeys that those people were going through, and the pages with which they may have had the most trouble. Things you can take a look at, extended periods of time on page, and because maybe folks are confused. But we're really excited. We're working through that, and hopefully we'll be able to offer that in the near future as an option for federal agencies to have a customer satisfaction survey tool that will be integrated into Google Analytics. So there's a lot of potential in the future.
Excellent. And it's getting us closer. We're not going to be fully omni-channel, but it's getting us closer by linking more data together.
Exactly.
So that's excellent. I want to really thank the panelists today. Thank you all for joining us and sharing your expertise. And they'll be available afterwards if you have questions. We're not going to be able to take questions because we're going to move right into our final speaker. So thank you.